And we're live. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to say good morning, Vietnam. I just feel like every time I say good morning, it's like it has to go, good morning, Vietnam.
You did it.
But that is not what we're here about. As much as I would love to talk about Robin Williams, we are talking about science fiction in Lit RPG, and we have an amazing panel of guests here for you. So, what we're going to do is we're going to let everyone kind of give their spiel about how they do what they do and who they are. And we're going to start with Kale this time and do a counterclockwise roll call. So start us off, Kale, and let us know who you are and how things are going.
Okay, well, I'm going to go a little slow because we appear to have someone running off here. But my name is Kale Plowman. I write 90% lit RPG, a little bit of actually traditional science fiction, and a little bit of progression fantasy. It kind of touches on lit RPG. 4 series, 1 complete. 2 of them science fiction. The science fiction series are Viceroy's Pride and Tower of Somnus, which is science fiction amongst a whole bunch of other things. Non-sci-fi series are Blessed Time and A Dream of Wings and Flame. But yeah, I probably been writing for about 2-ish, 3-ish years now. But if you look for me on Amazon, you'll find some stuff.
Fantastic. Steven?
I thought we were going counterclockwise.
Is that not counterclockwise?
Yeah, never mind. It is. You're right. I'm good. I'm tired. I've been up all night playing Baldur's Gate and Spider-Man, so...
Is that why your camera is turned off? Because you're concerned about the bags under your eyes?
I have the bags under my eyes, yes.
I just own mine, yeah.
Wear them with pride. Wear them with pride, Stephen.
Stephen just woke up for sure. No, Stephen hasn't been to bed yet.
It's the same with me. I haven't gone to bed yet, so let's do this.
So I'm Stephen Landry. I've written 14 books, starting with the Stardivers series. I've also written a standalone called Pop Smoke, and I am the co-author of Vampire Sorcerer, Temple of the Storm, the series, and Station Company Core with Jeffrey Falcon Logue.
Fantastic. Craig?
Good morning. Craig Hamilton. I write only lit RPG so far. I co-write in Tao Wong's System Apocalypse universe. I've got 3 books out under the System Apocalypse Relentless series, the 3rd of which just released at the beginning of this month.
Nice. Shami?
I'm Shami Stovall. I write science fiction, fantasy, lit RPG. I now have 26 published novels. So, whoa! My lit RPG is, I guess, it's fantasy science fiction. They're squished together. So, I love science fiction. I think it's my favorite genre. It's not quite as gangbusters as fantasy, but I grew up loving a lot of old sci-fi, like Robert Heinlein and stuff like that. You know, like the hardest of core sci-fi. So I'm really into the genre. Looking forward to this panel.
That's fantastic. Okay, so audience, when you have questions, please put them into the comments so that we can bring these to our illustrious panelists. We will start off with the most important question that maybe anyone could ask in this genre, and that is Star Wars or Star Trek? Go. Let's start with you, Shami, and we'll go clockwise this time around.
Well, Star Trek, definitely, because I really loved The Next Generation. I 100% grew up on all of that. I loved Deep Space Nine, and I loved Voyager. Super fun. High fives all around. Star Wars is amazing, or was amazing. I cannot stand any of the new Star Wars stuff. I feel like I used to be a fan of Star Wars. and now my love of Star Wars is dead.
Okay, now can you define what you mean by new Star Wars stuff? Because there's been a significant amount of new Star Wars stuff with, everything coming in with Rey and Kylo Ren and
Yeah.
all that. And then now Disney's been doing all these series with The Mandalorian and oh man, they're escaping me now. Andor and those kind of, episodical series.
Yeah.
So are those two different, or are they combined in your hatred, or?
Well, I really loved the original trilogy, and I
Mm.
must admit I liked Rogue One, even though there was some things that were a little preposterous, but I liked that. I did like some of the cartoons. I super love cartoons to death. So things like Clone Wars and stuff like that are like, yeah. Um, Everything outside of what I literally just mentioned, I dislike either a little bit or intensely. I tried The Mandalorian. I actually thought the first season was pretty good, but then it exploded. Grand Admiral Thrawn, those books are crazy amazing. I mean, Timothy Zahn knocked it out of the park. I can't believe they missed that opportunity to turn those into movies. I feel like that's one of the greatest missteps of the movie industry. What were you even thinking, man? These would have been amazing, gangbusters. Everything else besides what I just listed, on some scale, sliding scale of -1 to -10, absolutely despise. So Star Trek it is. To answer your question, Star Trek has done only a little bit to gather my ire. So woo, they win.
Awesome, Greg.
So I guess the question is, do you want to live there or do you like it more? So if I had to pick if I wanted to live there, probably Star Trek. But I love the Star Wars universe. I really love a lot of the old novels, like Shammy was saying, the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn, a lot of the X-wing series by Michael Stackpole and Eric Alston, and some of the was it Wraith Squadron. Some of those are some of my favorite books. I just absolutely love those, the storytelling and the characterization in those. So I'm gonna have to go with Star Wars, even despite some of the recent missteps and sharing a lot of Shami's opinions.
You're more forgiving than me.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of Star Wars, and some of I do enjoy a lot of the more recent shows. I really enjoy The Mandalorian. I sneak a lot of Mandalorian references into the last couple of my System Apocalypse books. Nobody's called me out on that yet, though. So, yeah, Star Wars.
Awesome. We switched it up here, apparently. Kale.
Yeah, no, Stephen apparently really wanted me to go before him.
It's like I have to finish this off. I got to switch it up.
He's got a lot of prep work to do here.
Yeah. He had to get his binder.
Coffee.
So I would probably say Star Wars, partially because I actually I write a lot of science fantasy, and I really like science fantasy, and I more or less consider Star Wars to be science fantasy rather than science fiction. I obviously like Star Trek because it's hard not to like it, but I grew up with the original trilogy and the expanded universe. I will not be calling it Legends. I read pretty much every book, including the really bad ones, like the really, really weird ones where you're wondering how it happened. The ones that are
The Crystal Star.
Yeah, Crystal Star was actually my first one. But I read even Courtship of Princess Leia, which was very clearly the author's thinly disguised fetish, the book. I was like, reading that. So I absolutely love the Star Wars novelizations. I actually find the new trilogy intriguing because once I started writing, I started trying to break things down into plot beats. And the new trilogy was very interesting, and it taught it's a masterclass in what not to do, and yet it made billions. And it was part of my way of getting past imposter syndrome, because I was just watching Rise of Skywalker, and I'm like, this is barely a functional narrative. Yet 5 minutes of this has made more than I ever will in my life, so I can't be that much of a failure. But I'm also going to throw in there that actually slightly above Star Trek for me is Babylon 5. I was a big Babylon 5 guy, but I think I'm in a very small minority.
Well, if we're just gonna bring in any science fiction fantasy thing, the 40K Warhammer 40K universe.
I was
pretty-
just about to say that
That's
Star
more out
Wars,
there,
Star
yeah.
Trek. You mean Warhammer 40K, right?
Whoa, yeah, that's. I can't wait to see
Speaking
that.
of universes I would not want to live in, though.
Right.
I don't think it counts as living there.
I mean, like you guys, I grew up reading the Star Wars books. I grew into being a Star Trek guy after that, and then got into Warhammer and everything else that's out there. Like Star Wars was kind of that gateway for me.
Nice. Because it's AI. That's awesome. So we're gonna have one more question on this, just because it's here is the first question coming in, and then we'll step away from this side of the topic for now, at least for sure. But Richie would like to know, would you be a Jedi or a Sith? This is for everyone, including you, Steve. Oh, okay. Well, we'll start it off with Stephen Landry, work our way counterclockwise, and then I'll give my answer at the end here.
I would be a Sith for sure. The Jedi have way too many laws and guidelines, and the whole no being in relationships. I've got too much passion to not be a Sith.
To plow a lady. I've got too much of the passion.
I need to plow. I have to be a Sith.
Quote of the stream. Okay.
Don't quote
I mean,
me out of context.
that wasn't what I meant by that.
No. That's what you meant by it. We're good.
Yeah. That's
Probably the
that
only
is
one here
literally
that's written
verbatim what you
harem.
said. That's what I heard.
Yeah,
That's what came out.
this is being recorded, so.
Yeah. Gail.
Oh, okay. So me, that's tough. I really agree with everything Stephen said about how
Ladies.
ladies are a big part of it, but
I need to
also
plow.
the not being a robot part of it. I think I would probably end up falling on the Jedi side for very esoteric and dumb reasons, which is like late night conversations about how Star Wars is actually a genre, and that like the Jedi are progression fantasy like monks. I like the idea of being a prog fantasy monk, so that's why I am defaulting to Jedi and like, you know, going and training in isolation and meditating on the Force for 500 years as my like golden Jedi core levels up or whatever.
It's on your bucket list.
So you're
Yeah.
Yoda.
Yeah, Yodaing it. The other side is I've read too much like the expanded universe where like literally using the dark side just melts you and you like turn into a puddle or whatever. So I'd like to avoid that. So it's a lot of
You
self-interest.
get a cool mask.
Whoa.
And then you blow up. Yes.
Greg.
I'm gonna have to go with Sith. They're just too cool. I love all the like the old Republic cinematics that show off the Sith. Just kind of that aesthetic. If I got
That
the
passion.
if I had to cosplay
much
for
passion.
one of my life goals is cosplaying one of the like the Sith acolytes and getting into like the 501st Legion. So I think that would be where I would go with that. Plus the whole plowing thing, can't
Gotta be able to do
pass
that.
that up.
Jummy.
Well, what's wrong with you guys? Seriously. Like, the Sith have this like master apprentice must kill each other dynamic. I thought you guys read those books. And the Sith are insane.
Hey, real quick, if you go back far enough in Legends, before the rule of two, they were more about the passion and just
There was
So
a
if we
Sith
go-
Empire. There
Go
was a
back
Sith
in
Empire.
time. That's like somebody being like, well, in the
Who
Renaissance,
hasn't wanted to kill their boss?
people
Like
wore
I mean,
pantaloons, so I'm going to keep wearing pantaloons. But so the Sith kill each other regularly. Hate that. That's awful. All their lightsaber colors, trash. Come on now. All the Jedi have cool lightsaber colors. I want to collect.
but they're not
crystals.
red.
See, here's what you got to do. You got to do the Revan route, where you're Sith for a little bit and get all your plowing out of you, and then you become a Jedi and you're like a gray Jedi. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what you got to do. That's my choice. Is all of the above. You know. So, but you end Jedi. You got to end Jedi. The Jedi are the coolest. Come on now. We don't want to be murdering our apprentices, and we got to have a white lightsaber because that's the coolest one.
Jedi Passion era.
So for myself, I'm kind of obligated as a Canadian to go with Jedi. I don't think that there's a Canadian that would be like, no, I'm going to be a Sith. We're just too nice. We wouldn't be able to make it last. So yeah, there's as cool as I think the Siths are, and they have some, like willingness to do a bunch of stuff. Now, in saying that, I would probably be a Jedi that would have to like step away and bone a little bit and then not tell anybody or whatever. But
well, Neil had a
definitely.
good point. You take your Sith gap year and then you go back to college.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you do like Obi-Wan Kenobi and you just kind of like live like a normal dude, just doing your own thing, and you're like, I'm chilling. I'll be a Jedi later.
He was
I don't need to be on the council.
He was so lonely though.
Well, you don't know that. Okay,
Yeah.
Tatooine is a big planet.
With lots of sand.
He was hanging out with the
Sand
moped
gets
gang.
everywhere.
Oh God,
Such a quote.
it's like poetry. It rhymes.
He learned
Okay,
that howl somewhere.
so to switch this up a little bit, I'm gonna butcher this name. Is it Nai? What is your favorite sci-fi series not televised, which grabbed your attention and has given you inspiration? So Craig, why don't you start us off with this one?
I'm going to have to go with Warhammer 40K on that one.
What?
That
is such a surprising answer from you.
Yeah. I mean, I got into painting the models, playing, Dawn of War. Just, I don't know, something about that universe really is compelling. It's huge. There's so many stories you can tell. There's so many different sides. There's no real good guys. But there's a lot of storytelling in that universe. Dan Abnett's Gaunt's Ghost series is just absolutely phenomenal storytelling about this commissar who's assigned a regiment of soldiers and makes the decision to pull the regiment off their home planet as it's being enveloped in a chaos warp storm. And so he's in charge of all these soldiers that hate him because they blame him for not staying and fighting for their planet. And it's just really compelling characters and like a really gritty universe. It's the grimdarkest of the grimdark. So just really enjoy that.
Awesome. Kale.
Well, if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I'd say Dune. Well, I guess theoretically that's been televised, but I'm not sure it has. I acknowledge the more recent movie. I would probably now have to go with Saitine Regenesis and I feel like I should be able to pronounce her name, CJ Shira. It's a phenomenal series. It's sort of linked with another book called Down Below Station. There's like 2 Hugo winners and the 3 of them. The characterization is absolutely phenomenal, and it does a really good job of being in space and feeling like space without kind of, jumping out at you and shouting, this is science fiction. We're going to have a ton of, warp converter, plasma coil sort of stuff to like, it makes it feel like space without hitting you over the face with like, and I say this as someone who will do these things in my own writing as like sort of touchstones to get people, into the flavor of the scene, but she does a lot better job than I do because she's won a Hugo at doing the same thing, just sort of making you feel like you're there. It is not very much action heavy. It's a lot more mystery, political drama. Saitine and Regenesis, both of them are probably 80% inside the heads of people. It's really sort of like a psychological sci-fi, but I just haven't seen anything like it or that does it as good as it, other than Dune, but Dune is technically televised now.
Nice. Xiaomi.
Well, Craig took my answer because I like Warhammer. My entire lit RPG, I tried really hard to get the tone of Warhammer, because it's such a cool science fiction fantasy world. But if I had to go with a number 2, I would probably go with the Island in the Sea of Time series. And again, like, this is back to my old school sci-fi roots, because I'm pretty sure that book was published in like the 70s or something. But it's about like an island that goes back in time to like the Trojan War era, but it's like modern people who are living on this island plus like a military ship or a base.
Wasn't it a Coast Guard cutter? I thought
Yeah, okay, yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's been a while since I've read the series, but I super love the series. I'm really big into history in general. I have a bachelor's degree in history. I really love the old science fiction that's basically like, what if? What if we, something crazy happened, like this fucking island showing up in the middle of the like heroic era. So I think it would also be easy to make as a TV show, because basically the whole sci-fi premise is modern people, ancient era.
Mm.
Boom, go.
there's a split off too. They went back in time, and then technology stopped working in the present time, and there's a separate series. It's S.M. Sterling, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sterling's great. He's a great writer. I mean, as long as some of his works get a little oh geez, but that one's a great one. I don't think I ever read the spinoff though.
Yeah, Dies the Fire.
Oh,
I think
Dies
is
the Fire. Yeah, I totally
yeah,
read that.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize it was somehow connected to Island in the Sea of Time, but Dies the
Yeah,
Fire.
because it's
is
like
great.
Nantucket that goes back, and like that's where
Yeah.
the modern world's technology like absorption started.
Wow. Well,
So-
Craig, you're my new best friend. How come you haven't? How come you didn't immediately start this panel by saying like, "Whoa, Shammy, I've read all the same books as you." Really, only my husband is somebody who's read as many of the like old school science fiction stuff as I have. So it's really cool that you've read and liked them. But yeah, that's the one that would be a TV show. I think it could be easily doable. Like, there's almost no $20 in a bag of chips, and this could be filmed.
That's awesome. Stephen.
The first thing that came to my mind when asked the question was The Forever War by Joe Haldeman. Then my mind jumped to like the Stainless Steel Rat, Harry Harrison, Death Planet.
Hey! I said one. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. But if I have to go with just one series overall, the Culture by Ian M. Banks. That would be my pick.
Mm.
It's like the only happy sci-fi.
That's awesome. So let's talk more about sci-fi in lit RPG, which is what most of you or all of you write in. Can you tell me how that has been a challenge for you, or has it been a challenge for you? Because as the lit RPG genre grows, we do definitely see sci-fi in there, but it's not as prevalent as maybe some of the other subgenres that are in that umbrella of lit RPG. Do you have an opinion as to why that would be, or how that's kind of playing out in your own work or your own career? Craig, why don't you want to? No, you started the last one. Cal, you start this one.
Sure. I think there's a lot of room for it, but I will tell you the reason why I only do it half the time, even though so I consider myself a sci-fi guy that doesn't, I like fantasy, but I'm a sci-fi guy predominantly. I came into the genre, and there's a reason why all of my science fiction has fantasy in it. My fantasy is fantasy, and it's really because of reader trends. I don't write solely to market, but I try and keep an eye on what people actually want to read, because I do absolutely have a couple books out there that, everyone who's read them says they're good, but they will never be marketable. And I wrote them for me, and that's great. But I also like to pay bills. So I try and write to what I think my readers want to read too. And the way I always envision it is there are choices you make that kind of put a cap on your readership. Certain type of protagonists, certain major plot points, if you have like a D-power arc. And science fiction is one of those things that in my mind, at least right now, puts a bit of a cap on you. Now, it's not a low cap. It's of the various choices that I see as limiting my readership, it's probably one of the higher caps there. So that's why I feel comfortable writing it at a fair amount. But that's part of the reason why I'm probably never going to go full sci-fi, at least until the readership comes around to being closer to 50-50 sci-fi and fantasy. But where I think there's a lot of fertile ground and a lot of what I do is, at my heart, I am kind of a hard science fiction guy. I don't like inventing Star Trek technobabble for, like, alternate dimensions and stuff like that to transport yourself. And I just do interstellar travel with magic. Like, it's this sort, like, I can suspend disbelief and hand wave away magic. I can't do that with fake tech. I don't know. That's just a personal hang up. So a lot of what I have is every interstellar empire, every alien invasion, they might have laser rifles, but the real core of how they got here is teleportation magic, space magic. They make a wormhole with magic, something like that. So I think that that's something that I like doing. I love alien invasion stories, but having the aliens be magic, and that's how I get past the fact that I don't know financially how it'd be worth sending a spaceship, for 60 years to conquer us and get what, I don't know, a little bit of like thorium, a little bit of water. Who cares? Like, we're not worth conquering unless you can teleport here.
Shammy.
So I think the reason that most people either avoid sci-fi writing it or maybe even reading it is because a lot of sci-fi has a stigma of being couched in like real world science. I mean, that's the whole point, is it's science fiction. And a lot of science fiction that I've read usually takes a lot of real world concepts and either extrapolates them or talks at length about them. And it can get boring. Some people don't like it. Or some people are already experts on the field and they get super irritated when it's wrong in a book. If you're going to talk about lasers and phasers and radioactivity and stuff like that, you better do a lot of research before willy-nilly just throwing it in there. You can't say something like, well, a nuclear bomb just went off here yesterday, but I'm just going to walk through and nothing bad is going to happen to me whatsoever, because most people are going to be like, what the like, does this guy know anything? And then they're angry and they're already slamming the book shut type of thing. So I feel like when you write it, you have to do a lot of research. You got to know what you're talking about if you're going to talk about it at length. And that can stop the flow of writing, because you're like, oh, I want to talk about this nuclear fallout graveyard, but like, what exactly would that entail? Like, how long does fallout stay in the area? How long will the radioactivity harm you? If you did just walk through it for like 30 minutes, how harmed would you be? How much like radioactive material is let off by an x-ray at like a dentist's office? Like questions like that, most people don't have the answer, so you would probably have to research it. And most people reading science fiction, if you say something inaccurate, get super angry. This isn't even a sci-fi book, but I remember getting enraged. I read those Twilight books, and at one point in the Twilight books, the author said that the vampires were different than people because they had an extra chromosome, and that werewolves had 2 chromosomes extra. And all I could think was, that's Down syndrome. Like, that's not vampires. Like,
Put it in the comments. Sci-fi fantasy, space fantasy is the answer for a lot of us.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just answering why science fiction isn't more prevalent. Like, all it's lonesome. How come there aren't more sci-fi things? And I just think it's one of those, like, it's more tedious if you're going to write it, and if you get it incorrect, people are right there up in your face being like, that's not right, and you're like, oh, oops.
Well, I
I
think
gotta go
just
back to
like
the drawing board.
expanding on that, when people hear sci-fi, they kind of aren't thinking sci-fi fantasy, but they are thinking more hard sci-fi, like, or something like The Expanse, where it doesn't have the more magical elements to it. I mean, even our favorite Warhammer 40K has a lot of magical elements to it, but it is still considered a part of the sci-fi genre.
I consider it science fantasy. I don't know.
Yeah, I would definitely put it in the science fantasy. There's too many time gods and space orcs and things like that to be
And a significant portion of your technology works because you think it works. I love the concept, but that feels like a science fantasy concept.
I think it depends the story you're telling in that universe. Like with Warhammer, you know, which faction, and you know, that's gonna
Yeah, like the
That's gonna-
Tower of Sci-Fi.
yeah.
Well, one
Yeah,
of the things I
sorry,
love
my
about the
comments were
war,
just about hard science fiction because sci-fi fantasy you can get away with a lot of stuff. Star Wars, I mean,
yeah,
what do they
Star
even
Wars
use for,
is
what do they even use for fuel? Like you were talking about, like, whoa, we're gonna go into hyperdrive and stuff. But I mean, in Star Wars, they're just like, well, I'm gonna fly by X-wing from this planet to the completely other side of the universe, and I'm like, X-wings can just do that, and Star Wars is like, shut up. Don't ask those kind of questions. We're on a space adventure, and I'm like, oh, okay, but that's fine. I like science
I mean,
fantasy.
look at like okay, Futurama. That people consider that totally sci-fi, even though it has all these weird, and I know it's a comedy, but like
I was gonna say.
the poop that's like dark matter poop that they use for their starships.
Well, I mean, there's soft sci-fi too. I think a lot of it is stylist, at least from me, is stylistically like what kind of stories you're trying to tell with it. And there's sort of like a mold for science fiction that I'm not sure fits well with a lot of our readership. And so that's, I think, why a lot of us are writing science fantasy. And it's one of these things where, like, even if there really wasn't magic in it, like I had one series that was mostly nanobots aimbotting people, and there was magic in it too. But if it was just solely nanobots like helping you with your reflexes, if the story was like a fantasy story, you know, this, you know, Bildungsroman, where you're like, you know, finding yourself and you're defeating the evil space vizier or whatever. I mean, it can be you know, even without having a whole lot of magic in it, if you're telling sort of a fantasy story in a fantasy style where you're using technology as a stand-in for magic, it can still kind of be there. And a lot of what I think people are doing here is they're like, you know, they're listening to us while they're working, they're trying to get a little bit of escapism. And I think what Shammy was saying earlier is right, that when I get into hard science fiction, I try not to do too many of the technical details, but I go obsessive researching, you know, what's the ionizing level for for like a laser? Can I have a laser rifle in this atmosphere? A whole bunch of just nonsense like that. And that kind of, sometimes it makes it harder for people to sit back and relax and actually enjoy what you're doing, because there's this sort of feel where it's like, I need to check your math on, like, you know, how much reaction mass is used on the spaceship. And there's a place for that, but it's not really in lit RPG yet, because a lot of what we have are just people who are just trying to have a good time, and they're not trying to, you know, flex their undergrad physics degree.
I think a huge part of that is just because the genre, and specifically the niche of sci-fi lit RPG is still growing, and as it grows, we're going to see more and more of the sci-fi fantasy, and with that, we're also going to see more and more harder sci-fi stuff with leveling and caps and things of that nature come into being.
I think to a certain degree that that's true, but I think part of it is that within lit RPG, you know, people are there for the progression fantasy. They want to see the main character grow and, you know, a lot of times become OP. And that's really hard to do in crossing over with a lot of the other subgenres that, you know, maybe sci-fi. Like, how do you do that for a space opera? How do you do that for a mil sci-fi at a large scale when you're looking at, you know, fleets and fleets of, you know, starships, you know, fighting engagements across star systems. So I think that's a lot more challenging. There's a lot more logistics you have to think about when you're doing that kind of thing. And I don't think we've really seen that, you know, lit RPG expand to those kind of subgenres yet for some of those reasons.
I am nodding my head yes.
I was nodding in proxy. I thought that was a really interesting point. So this brings up an interesting question, because a lot of what we've talked about with sci-fi lends itself towards space and space travel or that kind of thing. But and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but science fiction has a broader scope than just space and military sci-fi where we could get into like dystopian future type stuff, if I'm not mistaken, like Brave New World or 1984, or even, some of the newer stuff like Hunger Games or Divergent series or something like that. Is that still considered sci-fi, or is that dystopian future and that's a different thing entirely, in your opinion? Shammy.
Well, I think now we're just arguing semantics. So, like how you would classify a creature or an object, you got to be like, is it a mammal? Yes, no.
Right.
Is it, so I feel like, yeah, The Hunger Games is science fiction because it's under this umbrella of it uses real world science or history. It doesn't actually offer magic, or if it has crazy things like, and then we turned all the dead bodies of the kids into monsters, they explain it all through science as opposed to the wizard who reanimated everybody's body. So I do consider them sci-fi because I think technically they are science fiction. I think most people think space when they hear science fiction because that's the coolest and the craziest and the most iconic. Whereas a lot of these other things, sometimes people call them speculative fiction. Like, oh, we're just speculating. And I'm like, oh, okay, sure. But when you hear science fiction, you think like, oh snap, we're gonna go into a black hole, something crazy. So I
My
think
my
that's why.
first thought when I hear science fiction is usually aliens, space marines, that kind of.
Yeah, yeah, the really cool stuff, that kind of thing. So I think that's why.
Interesting. Anyone else have a thought on that, or does that pretty much sum it up?
I'd like to agree mostly. I think a lot of it depends upon the source of the dystopian future. Hunger Games is pretty clearly sci-fi in my mind, but for something like Brave New World, where it's not really extrapolation of existing technology, it's more just using existing technology and being a gigantic POS that powers it. I'm not really sure that's science fiction, but like for example, I write cyberpunk, and I consider cyberpunk to be science fiction. If you're having the full body mods and all of that, and like whatever nonsense you're doing with the internet, that's fairly sci-fi, especially if you're extrapolating beyond the bounds of like what we reasonably see in the next 20 years. And I consider most speculative fiction, which I think is a great phrase for a lot of it, to be sci-fi. But the other thing that I will always use as sort of my like dividing line, and this is absolutely working backwards, and I will own this, is Asimov's Caves of Steel, which was part of the Robot Chronicles, was literally people who were agoraphobic on Earth, where they couldn't really go out into the open because it was a murder mystery with robots in like the depths of like a mega city. And if anyone is calling Caves of Steel not science fiction, they're wrong, regardless of their reasoning. And that's where I start and work back.
I definitely agree with Shani as well, that a lot of it comes down to semantics. And in my opinion, like something can be post-apocalyptic, but if it has sci-fi tech or aliens in it, then in my mind, it becomes sci-fi.
It's very interesting because we see so many different opinions on a lot of this kind of stuff. And I bring this up only because my wife is adamantly frustrated with the fact that she absolutely 100 believes that aliens could not possibly and do not exist at all. So therefore, anything that has aliens in it would be fantasy, not science fiction, because there's no way in her mind science fiction has this, it has to have the realm of possibility in our future in order for it to be science fiction. And so therefore, if there's no aliens, then anytime there's an alien in a story, it can't be science fiction. Now, I know that a lot of you are going to be like, that she is wrong, blah, blah, blah. But there are those opinions out there. What I'm curious to know about with this is, do you think that something like that would be able to make an inroad or kind of give us a little bit more of a broadening to bring sci-fi into lit RPG, because you're not dealing with fleets and admirals and all the big stuff that Craig was bringing up that kind of might be a little bit more of a barrier to bringing sci-fi into lit RPG? Is this another way that we could go that would kind of soften that path, kind of make it a little bit more easy for it to be more accessible to people who love lit RPG? Greg.
I mean, yeah. I mean, if somebody does something well, it could explode. You never know. And you know, look at like Dungeon Crawler Carl. That. I mean, yes, it's got like aliens and things like that, but that has a lot of like dark humor. Um, and I don't think anybody would really have predicted that as being, one of the top lit RPGs in the genre, right out of the gate. But it's doing amazing. So I think if you do something well and you get a following, then sure, I think there's room for a lot of new ideas. Lit RPG is still pretty new, then it's definitely growing. So I think that there's always room for people to try new things and find what works.
Fantastic. Go ahead, Cal.
So what your wife's talking about is the Fermi paradox, which is absolutely a fascinating thing. The idea is that the universe is so big that if there were alien life, we would have seen evidence of it by now. But the sort of corollary to it is, as they're looking at stars in the Goldilocks zone and all of that, statistically, there have got to be aliens somewhere. They might not be able to reach us. And one of the more interesting answers to it is that the reason why we don't see aliens is there's somebody gobbling them up. And so one of the answers I've seen is von Neumann Berserkers. My hard sci-fi book involves those. Those are self-replicating robots that go from planet to planet anytime they, sort of like detect radio waves and just kind of kill everything. And that's actually it's something that I kind of play with a bit for lit RPG, is like, if you need to have a reason why you have this alien invasion, it's the same reason why we don't actually see aliens, because once you get past a certain tech level and there's enough neutrinos out there's enough radio waves out there, someone comes to get you, and then you can have your plucky protagonist gain the power of magic to fight back, and then then you have your entire story there. But like, it actually works very well, because it's one of the easiest and most interesting in my mind motives for you to have this alien invasion story, which is a lot of lit RPG sci-fi.
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things about the genre is, you have the system that comes and causes an apocalypse and creates a system, a leveling system, game system in the real world. And that is basically an alien invasion. Also, Dragons of Pern is totally a sci-fi.
It is.
Yeah, just read that prologue, yeah.
That's awesome. So now let's get back into a little bit more of a personal, individualized situation for all of you. What are some of the challenges that you have found in writing lit RPG that is science fiction based? And we're going to start Stephen off with this one.
My challenge is probably more in just the just marketing. Sometimes when I'm marketing my sci-fi stuff, I don't know exactly how to describe it, because I mix in a lot of different elements. But another thing is I do a lot of research, and it's kind of what Shami was talking about, is I will research something for 10 hours straight, and it'll only amount to like maybe a paragraph or two in writing. So yeah. Writing sci-fi, sometimes it does tend to slow down the process.
Yeah, I can appreciate that for sure. Shami.
I guess the biggest challenge in terms of just writing a story is if I'm going to be using advanced tech, so beyond modern tech, space tech, faster than light travel, lasers, plasma, all this kind of really cool stuff. And then also use fantasy, because that's what I did in my lit RPG. Why can't the technology just win? in most situations, because when you think about a lot of stuff in sci-fi, there's so many really cool concepts that just instantly defeat everybody immediately.
Mhm.
Things like burning a planet's atmosphere to defeat an entire civilization of people is, I feel like when you get into these advanced sci-fi concepts, it starts to become like an all or nothing scenario. And we kind of experienced that with like nuclear bombs. You know what I'm saying? Like the bomb hits and it's all into the it's gone. You know what I'm saying? And that's where all that high tech weaponry goes immediately. It's just, I mean, I'm sure some of you guys have read like Ender's Game, where they have the little doctor gun that breaks apart the cohesion between atoms. And I'm
Mm.
like, how does throwing a fireball compare to like having somebody's atoms and molecular structure just fall apart? You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't even compare.
I
So
kind of see it as like one and the same. Like, okay, you have the gun, that's the tech, and then you also have the other side where it's the magic, where it's the you have to learn the disintegrate spell versus building or finding the tech.
well, I read a sci-fi book once where they wanted to mine a planet, and there were a bunch of aliens on the planet. They didn't want the aliens there. They also didn't want to have a land war with the aliens, and the aliens were not as advanced as they were. So they used like tungsten rods to pierce the fucking atmosphere, light it on fire, and kill them all instantly, type of thing. And what is even the point of even talking about magic? What if all the aliens had magic? You know what I'm saying? Like, who cares if they have a disintegrate spell? They're dead now. So I guess sometimes the real problem with me in stories is how come tech doesn't just immediately solve some problems? What would be the advantage of magic in this situation that tech couldn't solve? And I guess what I really came to is fun extra other types of science fiction concepts like pocket dimensions. Like so I really like the concept of pocket dimensions, and then I'm like, oh, what if you had a magic that was all about like
I love
having your
pocket
own
dimensions,
having your own pocket
multiverse stuff.
dimension.
Yeah,
Okay, so that kind of magic obviously could compete with high tech. Like that's and now you got to use your mind in order to use this, but you could totally defeat some people who have, man, they've got the biggest fucking gun you've ever seen, guys, but if you've got a pocket dimension, I can't get to you. hmm. you know so i really like I guess advanced magic, and so that's where I went with it, but it is very difficult in my opinion. I feel like a gun, just a normal modern day gun, is better than a lot of like spells you could learn in D&D. So that's all. That's the challenge.
You
well,
you
that's
bring up
where, like a magic barrier or something like that would come into play, or if you want to use a sci-fi term of a force field.
I mean, that's what I did. I just, I again, I really like Dune. And Dune, they wanted to find an excuse to have people knife fight, so they made shields that stopped you from, stabbing past a certain speed. And if you shot them with high tech, they exploded and killed everyone. And that's one way of doing it. I just made it so only wizards could cast force field. And so all force fields are powered by wizards, and yeah, you can shoot them, but they have a force field, and like their magic might not be as good as a gun against someone unprotected, but it takes a bit to get through a force field. But anyway, I jumped over Craig, so I'm gonna step back now.
No, keep going, and then we'll let Craig finish it off.
Okay. Well, so I think part of the problem is doing the research, because I know that I spent at least a couple days researching orbital mechanics solely to figure out what the day-night cycles would look like on a tidally locked moon on a gas giant, because there's something wrong with my brain. And so that ate up a lot of time. But a lot of it is exactly also what Jamie was talking about, where you kind of have to come up with workarounds around these very obvious questions, which is, how do you stop the rod of God? How do you stop the tungsten rod from space? How do you stop the fact that a tank is very hard for like a dude with a sword to beat? And I wrote an entire series around those
Science
questions.
fiction is still fiction, and
Yeah, but
Bill.
like it requires you to do a lot of workarounds, and it's hard to keep the level of disbelief low for them. Things like pocket dimensions work really well, and there's definitely things you can do, but it involves a lot of mental gymnastics, and not having those mental gymnastics show to readers is what I would say my difficulty is how do I do these workarounds without making it patently obvious that I wanted a badass magic sword in my space opera.
So my answer is I got to cheat a little bit since I was playing in somebody else's universe, so I didn't have to think through a lot of those, fundamental natures of the system and how it interacted with the real world, because that was already set up, in Tao's main series. So I just had to stay in the rules, and play within those guidelines. But at the same time, to keep things new, to keep things fresh, like I have to come up with new technologies that maybe the main character doesn't see in the main series, and my character can interact with and use things in different ways. So,
Dude, that's even harder. You have to play in the bounds.
Yeah, I feel like you have less control than to hand wave, because there's definitely times where, like, especially when I'm doing magic to get around these things, and I'm like, wow, how do I get around this question? And the answer is I made up a spell, or I made up like an exotic animal or mineral that fixes it. It's like, okay, done.
Did you have more to say on that, Greg, or is that
no, I think that was the most of it.
the crux of it?
Yeah.
The most important thing. We have about 9 minutes left in our panel here, so we're going to keep going with a few more questions. If you have a question, throw it up, and we'll try and get it answered. We do have a couple that were asked early on that we just didn't have a chance to because it wasn't sort of in the flow of what we're doing. I think we answered the question of why isn't there more sci-fi lit RPG. I feel like we answered that one. There was a quick follow-up question about Decepticon or automobile decals when it came to the Jedi and Sith. I think is your answer different? Would you be a Sith but still be an Autobot, or would you be a Jedi and yet still be a Decepticon?
Autobots can still go hard.
I would also probably convert to Decepticon, if only because I wanted to be like one of the like Beast War dinosaurs or whatever. But
See, I'd go back to the Autobots for that one.
yeah, we're all just flipping here. Yeah.
Nah, man, I'm Autobot all the way. What's wrong with you guys? Seriously,
Autobots are passionate, man.
you got to be a prime.
Bumblebee?
What's wrong with you? Got to get an Allspark up in here. Gah! Megatron always loses.
But he keeps trying. He has the spirit.
Dude, he employed Starscream as his fucking number one. That guy is doomed
He's
for
not
failure.
smart, but he has the spirit.
Hey, but at least in Beast Wars, he was a dragon. Okay, that's the only iteration of him where I'm clapping hard for that guy. I'm like, whoa, he picked the best animal, a fictional one.
And were you going to say something there, Stephen, or is it?
Megatron has somehow returned.
No.
We're going back to Star Wars, yeah.
Yeah.
But no, like neither the Autobots or Decepticons, the Predacons all the way.
Nice.
Predacons, yeah. Beast Wars, I really liked Beast Wars. That was probably my favorite Transformer version of all of them.
And I'm thinking of the bad CGI one growing up. Personally.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That one. I didn't know there was another one.
I think they came out with one recently.
Yeah, there was a I don't know if it was called Beast Wars. I can't remember, but yeah, there was a new Transformers released recently where they had all of the animals kind of joining in the fray, big gorilla and stuff.
They're literally trying to assassinate all my childhood.
Yeah.
And Richie asks, what fantasy/classic story would you like to see redone in a sci-fi fashion? Example, Treasure Planet being Treasure Island.
You know what I would like, and it was kind of done in Wrath of Khan, is Moby Dick. just these sort of like all-consuming passion through space, like, hunting someone down. It would be pretty easy to do as some sort of like space bounty hunter story, but just having, some sort of epic in pursuing the person who wronged you and just getting obsessed and like literally destroying yourself chasing that person. I mean, it would probably not be a one-to-one adaptation, although I guess you could be trying to kill a space whale. I mean, that's possible. But like, I really think that'd be an interesting one to do in a sci-fi remake.
My sci-fi book that won the Cygnus Award is a sci-fi retelling of the Moby Dick.
Well, there we go. Good ideas.
Whoa, you're also my new best friend. High five over here. I would have gone with Agatha Christie's And Then There Was None, that wacky murder mystery. I don't know if any of you guys have read that, but everybody was invited to an island and they all start dying one by one in crazy ways.
It sounds like
match up.
a Doctor Who episode.
Yeah, well, it's an old book, but there's like a poem at the mansion they're staying at that has a whole bunch of people die in the poem, and then everybody starts mysteriously dying, like on the poem, and so everybody is convinced because they're the only people on this island that one of them is the killer, and so not only are they trying to figure out, like, suss out who is the killer, they're trying to not die. It kind of reminds me of that the imposter game that everybody loves. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Among Us.
Among Us. There we go. Yep. So a sci-fi movie, Among Us, based on Agatha Christie's And Then There Was None.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I would pay to see that. Anyone else have anything?
I have a soft spot for fairy tale retellings. So I think it would be interesting to see, more like classic kind of Grimm's fairy tale sort of stuff.
I was gonna say,
remade as
yeah.
as progression fantasy lit RPG. I think that would be some interesting stuff to see.
Or give me something that's like Shakespeare but with a sci-fi setting.
I know that there were a couple Count of Monte Cristo animes that I really wanted to be better than they were. I didn't want to say that I wanted to see Count of Monte Cristo because it's a great baseline story. I didn't want to say that I wanted to see it made into fiction because I know it's been done not poorly, but kind of mid a number of times. But if there were good adaptation of that, like that's kind of what I was thinking of too.
If we think of, or if we consider zombies as science fiction, then you could argue that they did that with the Pride and Prejudice and Zombies adaptation. They did pull that out. So
I'm more partial to Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
Yeah.
That's fantasy.
Yeah. But we could make that. So that's a modern classic I want remade into a sci-fi. That's where I'm going.
Right.
Space Abraham Lincoln fighting space vampires.
As a cyborg.
Yeah, perfect. We're all on the same page here. Yeah.
It all works. We're running out of time here. We're getting close to the end. So why don't we take the last 2 minutes that we have and let you guys talk about what you're working on, what you have coming up, what you're excited about, and anything else you want to plug. So we're going to start with Shami and work our way around to everyone else.
Yeah. All right. Well, first off, JD in the comments, I do like the Hunger Games. I like Squid Games, any death games. As a matter of fact, my entire lit RPG, the Nexus games, is Guy gets isekai'd over to participate in a Warhammer 40k death game, basically. That's the whole thing. And then I had a sci-fi come out just like a couple days ago, the Half-Life Empire. For some reason on Reddit, everyone and their mother is like, is it Half-Life 3? Like, I don't know. I'm like, it's not Half-Life 3. God damn it. But yeah, it's like a post-apocalyptic. I really love the Fallout games. But Fallout, you start off in a shelter and then you escape and you're in the post-apocalyptic wasteland. This book is like somebody who wants to get into a shelter, like they want to escape the wasteland, so they're trying to find a shelter. And it just came out like 2 days ago, so I'm really excited for that. I really love my lit RPG because I love Warhammer, and I have one more book to write in that, and then it'll be finished. So that's me. Pew 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 pew.
Pew 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 pew. Great.
So My third book in the System Apocalypse Relentless, it's called Apocalypse Grit, just came out at the beginning of October. So that's my big thing right now. Working on a few different projects, and then I'll dive into book 4 in that series.
Awesome. Kale.
I'm working on 2 things right now. One is done, and we're waiting to get it voice acted, and that is book 4 in the Tower of Somnus series, which is science fiction, fantasy, and cyberpunk simultaneously. Don't worry about it, it works. I'm also writing monster progression fiction called Dream of Wings and Flames, and that's what I should have been doing while I was doing this. And then my finished sci-fi, if you want that, is Viceroy's Pride, which is a sci-fi trilogy.
Fantastic. Steven?
My collab with Jeffrey just came out earlier this month. Station Company Core Monster Hunters Freelancers. And the audiobook drops this Halloween. And if you like dark humor, like Borderlands style, mixed with some grimdark, body horror, then it's there.
You're gonna deliver.
It's a nice mix of station core and sci-fi. Narrated by Jessica Threet.
Awesome. She's great. Well, I believe that is it for all of us. I would love to thank our wonderful panel of guests. They were awesome. I loved all of those answers. I feel like I learned a lot, and I appreciate all of you. It was awesome. I do also have to say a big shout out and thank you to Geneva, who has been working tirelessly behind the scenes, not only organizing this entire event, but staying on these lives and making sure that the questions that you guys are posting are being put in a place where we can ask those questions to our panelists, and getting all of these links and everything sent to everyone so that you have access to these amazing authors and what they do. I appreciate all of it. I appreciate you for hanging out with us and listening to this panel today. And that's it for us and Sci-Fi in Lit RPG. Thank you very much. Have a great morning.
Thank you.
Have fun.
I'm waving right now.